Welcome back to Ghost Pirate Entertainment. I'm your host, Kanan Becker, and today we talk about 10 horror movies that I highly recommend. And with that, let's get to the list. Mads is a 2024 French horror thriller directed by David Moreau. It stars Lucille Guillaume, Laura Pavey, and Milton Reach. A teenager who stops off to see his dealer to test a new drug before heading off for a night of partying. But on his way home, he picks up an injured woman, and the night takes a surreal turn. Guys, this is a must-see movie. Wow, this movie is so good, but you got to be patient with it because it does start off a little bit slow, not super slow, but you're just kind of following these teenagers as they're getting ready and heading out for a night of partying, but it slowly starts to ramp up. But once it gets there, once it starts to go for it, oh man, does it go for it. And it just continues to build and never stops building all the way to the end. But it's also really cool and intense because the way it's shot. The entire movie is one take. It never stops. You're constantly following one character or another, and it'll split off to a different character when something happens, but it's always this continuous take, so it never feels like it takes a break. But I don't want to say much. I don't want to spoil it. I want you to go in as blind as I did and not tell you what this movie is exactly about. But it gets insane. It gets surreal. It gets gory. It gets brutal and savage. The sound design, the acting, the way it looks, the special effects, it all feels really grounded, but very visceral, especially like I said, when it goes for it in like the second half of the movie. But it's surprising, it's creative, it's refreshing. It really is a must see and one that I highly recommend. The Breach is a 2022 sci-fi horror movie. Directed by Rodrigo Godino, it stars Alan Hocco, Emily Alatalo, and Natalie Brown. Counting down the last days as chief of police of a tiny town called Lone Crow, John Hawkins must investigate one last case when a mangled body with uncanny wounds washes ashore along the river.
This guy's insides have been shredded.
It's Dr. Cole Parsons, physics genius. He leased a place up at Lynx Creek about 15 months ago.
All right, so this is a very small indie budget kind of horror movie. So it can't quite do some of the things it wants to do, but it really takes some big swings. And if you're a fan of cosmic horror like I am, this is one you definitely need to check out. Because it has a lot of creativity, it goes into some really interesting concepts, and the way that it unfolds is very entertaining. But the cast do a good job, it's well directed, it has some really interesting visuals, some stuff that'll stick with you. Not all of it quite lands, like I said, they take some big swings, and even though they don't quite have the budget to land some of the things, a lot of the special effects and things that they do really work. But I think if you keep your expectations in check and just go into this looking to have a good time, you'll be pleasantly surprised. The Stylist is a 2020 horror movie. Written and directed by Jill Javardizian, it stars Nahara Townsend, Bria Grant, and Laura Kirk. A lonely hairstylist becomes obsessed with the lives of her clients and descends into murderous madness.
I guess we all want what we don't have.
This is such a powerful movie, and the cast do an incredible job. I've been saying ever since this movie came out that Nahara Townsend deserved more awards and more accolades for the performance she gives, because it is truly remarkable. But this movie is chilling. It gets creepy and uncomfortable throughout this entire movie. You just never feel right. You're just always feeling off kilter and uneasy. But it gets violent and gruesome. In some ways, it reminds me of Maniac. It feels like a character study of just watching this person spiral out of control. But it's not a grimy grindhouse movie. It's slick and well produced. Just as far as the character goes, she has a similarity to Maniac. But it's well shot, well edited, just well put together in every way. But sadly, it really flies under the radar and I never hear anyone talk about it. So if you've never seen it, please do yourself a favor and check it out.
Round and round the garden like a teddy bear.
Ghostwatch is a 1992 British mockumentary supernatural horror movie. Directed by Leslie Manning, it stars Sarah Green, Michael Parkinson, and Gillian Bevan. In a live broadcast on Halloween night, a BBC team investigates a reported poltergeist in an ordinary London home. So this is so much fun. I just wish that I had seen this back in the day, because when people watched it, they thought it was real. It was represented on TV as like this live news special, and people bought it hook, line, and sinker. It scared the hell out of a lot of people, and I just think that's so much fun. There's been a few things over the years that have scared people when they saw it. There was something like this that was represented as real. Most famously in America, when they read War of the Worlds and people just lost their shit, thought aliens were invading and all that. But this is probably the most recent, at least that I know of, but it's really well produced and well acted. It's cool because a big chunk of the people involved in this were real news people. They're real news anchors. And so that's a lot of the reason why people bought it and believed it so much, because they're watching people that they watched on a normal basis do TV news investigation pieces and stuff. And it actually holds up really well because it's well produced. It's not like a normal TV thing. It's like a really high-end found footage type of movie. I just think it's a really fun one for this time of year, so definitely check it out.
There is nothing out there!
Your mind's looking for things to worry about.
The Wind is a 2018 supernatural horror movie, directed by Emma Tammy in her feature film debut. It stars Caitlin Gerard, Ashley Zuckerman, and Julia Godani-Tells. A plainswoman faces harshness and isolation of the untamed land in the western frontier of the late 1800s.
No longer a God-fearing woman.
I don't suspect God has much business out here.
This one's a really haunting, moody, atmospheric film. It's definitely a slow burn, one you really got to be patient with, because it's all about the dread and the anxiety and the unknown of what is going on here. Because it's one of those movies that what you see on the surface is not exactly what it appears. And as the movie goes on, it becomes more and more haunting, more and more uncomfortable. And you start to really kind of grasp what the real meaning of this movie is, as well as what this poor woman is dealing with. And yes, it is a supernatural movie, but the thing that I found the most uncomfortable about it was just this feeling of isolation. And after 2020 and what so many of us went through that kind of wrote it out by ourselves and felt super isolated and alone, this movie just hit home, I think anyway, for me, much harder. It's a well-written movie. The cinematography is fantastic. It's well-paced and edited. The directing is on point. The acting is great. It's just a solid movie and one that you definitely need to see.
Once unleashed, the Brood will destroy anyone who gets in their way. The Brood, they're waiting for you.
The Brood is a 1979 Canadian psychological body horror movie. Written and directed by David Cronenberg, it stars Oliver Reed, Samantha Egger, and Art Hindle. A man tries to uncover an unconventional psychologist therapy techniques on his institutionalized wife, amidst a series of brutal murders.
I want to go with you wherever you go.
Do you?
Yes.
Then look!
This is one of my favorite Cronenberg movies that's just not talked about enough, because it's one of his movies that kind of sneaks up on you, because it doesn't feel like it's gonna go as wild as it eventually does. And it's cool, especially if you don't know the twists and turns that this movie takes, because it'll catch you off guard like it did with me. But it's really well acted. It's one of his better directed and well-paced movies, because at its core, it's really about this father who's dealing with trying to keep his kids, trying to raise his kids, while at the same time dealing with the things that are going on with his wife, because he still cares about her, but more importantly, he's trying to keep his kids and trying to keep them out of harm's way. But I think it's a fantastic movie that has a lot of surprises along the way and is definitely worth your time. Bone Tomahawk is a 2015 Western horror movie, written and directed by S. Craig Zahler in his directorial debut. It stars Kurt Russell, Patrick Wilson, and Sid Haig. The story's about a small-town sheriff who leads a posse into a desolate region to rescue 3 people who have been abducted by a cannibalistic Native American clan.
We're making a 5-day journey in 3 days, riding along and sleeping the bare minimum.
I don't know what's west of here. No cattle trail or anything else goes in that direction.
So for a lot of this, it just feels like a very gritty Western. And I've heard some people say this is not horror, and I would agree with them to a point, but eventually this movie becomes a straight up full-blown horror movie, because it has some of the most brutal scenes, some of the most terrifying scenes. I mean, this movie holds nothing back. It gets extremely violent, really brutal, and cold, and just absolutely haunting. Like, there is one scene in particular in this where the imagery will just always stick with me. It also has a fantastic cast who all do an absolutely great job. And unfortunately, there just isn't that many Western horror movies. I think it's an aesthetic that works really well in horror, and I'd love to see it done more often. But as far as that subgenre goes, this is one of the very best. But I think it's a fantastically done movie. It's gripping, it's powerful, it's moving, it's uncomfortable and disturbing. It's well directed, well written, well performed, and one that I highly recommend.
This person is in there. You can see rise.
Blood Red Sky is a 2021 British-German action horror movie. Directed by Peter Thorsworth, it stars Roland Moeller, Perry Baumeister, and Alexander Scheer. When a group of terrorists hijack an overnight transatlantic flight, a mysterious woman must unleash a monstrous secret to protect her son.
Mein Sohn.
This is such a unique and fun movie because it's equal parts action and horror. It gets violent and bloody and exciting and action-packed, but also creepy and mysterious. And it goes into pretty wild directions, things that I just did not see coming. And I'm saying as little as I can about this because it's one of those movies that if you go into it pretty much blind like I did, not knowing all the different little twists and turns that it takes, it's a lot of fun. So if you're a fan of action-packed movies mixed with horror, then this is a fantastic pick. The Crazies is a 2010 horror movie. Directed by Breck Eisner, it's a remake of the 1973 film of the same name, and stars Timothy Olyphant, Radha Mitchell, and Joe Anderson. It's about a fictional Iowa town that becomes afflicted by a biological agent that turns those infected into violent killers.
Whoa, 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 whoa. What the hell are you doing?
Rory, you lay that gun down.
So last week I talked about the original The Crazies and how great that movie is, how much it still holds up, how haunting and mysterious and just eerie that movie is. But the whole time I was talking about it, I kept thinking about this movie, because I think this movie is better, and it's a rare situation where a remake is better than the original. In some cases, we're lucky and we get one that's equally as good, but very rarely do we get one that's better. And I don't think that most people would argue that. People still may not love this movie, I don't know, but I think it's a fantastic movie and one that really flies under the radar and deserves more attention, because it takes the basic concept of the first one and just pushes it even more to the extreme. It gets even more uncomfortable, even more violent. The things that people do, especially setting this up early on, are just haunting. But the tension in this is what really stands out, because this whole movie slowly gets more and more intense and more nerve-wracking as you're watching these people trying to escape this situation, and it just becomes so intense because of that. Because this whole movie, you're mostly focused on this couple and pulling for them to escape. They're really likable, and you just want them to get out of this horrible situation. On top of that, I'm a big fan of Timothy Olyphant and Radha Mitchell, and they're both fantastic in this. They're very believable in this and just keep you really invested in it. The one real noticeable difference, though, between this and the original is in the original, you could see where both sides were coming from and there wasn't a clear-cut villain, but this one is much more the military is a villain more so than it was in the original. But this is really well shot. It's very eerie and moody and atmospheric, especially towards the end. But if you're looking for an intense nail-biter, this is a great pick. Tourist Trap is a 1979 supernatural slasher. Directed by David Schmoller, it stars Chuck Connors, Tanya Roberts, and Don Jeffrey. It follows a group of young people who stumble upon a roadside museum run by a lonely, eccentric man, where an unknown killer begins to murder them one by one.
Come on, you guys, quit fooling around with me.
See my friend?
This is such a quirky, very fun movie. Like I always say with my list, I try to end them on something that's just fun, something you don't have to take overly serious, a real popcorn kind of horror movie. And this to me is a perfect one for that, because it's just so campy and full of this great energy. It is very stylish and unique. It's creative. It really is like a one of a kind. I wouldn't necessarily say it's scary, but it is macabre and gory at times and definitely still feels like a horror movie. But I think it's a perfect pick for this Saturday night. So do yourself a favor this holiday season, pick one of the movies off of this list, grab your popcorn and your candy, and enjoy! And I want to give a huge, massive, enormous thank you to the Ghost Pirate crew, to you guys over on Patreon, and to the channel members over here. You guys mean so much to me. And if you would like to help support this channel over on Patreon, there's a link down in the description, or you can become a channel member and help support the channel that way by going and clicking on that join button down there. But like always, thank you so much for watching. Please crush that like button, and remember guys, horror can be fun. And if you enjoyed this, click right here to watch me talk about 10 horror movies that I think are definitely worth watching over on Tubi. And I'll see you guys next time.